Well, hello there. In this video we're going to install IBM OS 2.11 from floppy disk and CD-ROM. We're doing all of this on real hardware, not on a virtual machine. This is an IBM PC 300GL which dates back to 1998 and has a Pentium 2 400MHz processor. I've replaced the spinning hard drive with a compact flash reader, and I've upgraded the RAM to 192 megs, unthinkable in its day. Our first step before installing OS 2 is to blank the existing drive, a 256 meg compact flash card in this case. To do that, we boot using a DOS-based floppy disk, and then we run a program called clear-HDD to quickly and completely wipe the drive. Simply using fdisk to delete the partitions won't always do that. It will often still leave behind the MBR, the master boot record, and that can cause problems. Clear-HDD then is the best way to make sure the drive is completely wiped. My boxed copy of OS 2.11, which you can see here, is the floppy disk version. OS 2.11 is actually very hard to find, and the CD-ROM version even more so. OS 2.11 was released in 1994, and at the time the CD-ROM edition supported a very short list of mostly SCSI CD-ROM drives. Nevertheless, there's a way to convert your floppy disk installation to a CD-based installation and to use an IDE CD-ROM drive rather than a SCSI one. I've written up that process and it's published on the OS 2 World site. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. I'll also do a video on that at a later date. Because we're doing this on real hardware with real floppy disks and a real CD-ROM, there are some steps which take a fair amount of time to get through. When that happens, I'll speed up the video so that we get to the interesting part. Partway through the installation, you'll notice that I was prompted to insert diskette 1. IBM had a quirky disk numbering system for the lifetime of OS 2, and that extended to their fix packs as well. Fix packs are the OS 2 equivalent of Windows Service Packs. The diskette we boot from is called the installation diskette, and then the next disk is called diskette 1. If we were doing a floppy disk-based installation, the third disk you use would be diskette 2, the fourth disk would be diskette 3, and so on. Thankfully, we don't have to worry about that as we're doing a CD-based installation. We have a few welcome screens now to introduce us to OS 2, with a note about Windows 3.1 support, and an introduction on how to actually use the installation program. The installation program asks us if we want to repartition the drive, or whether we're happy to let OS 2 take care of that for us. On a blank disk like ours now, it'll go ahead and create a single partition the size of the disk, up to a maximum of 2 gigs. OS 2.11 actually needs special drivers to see disks that large, but it doesn't have a problem with our 256 meg compact flash card. Unlike Windows NT, OS 2 can't partition a blank drive and then immediately continue the installation process. With the installation program having created our single 256 megs partition, we must once again reboot with the installation diskette, insert diskette 1 when prompted, and then we get right back to the installation drive section. Now it asks us how we want to format the partition. HPFS, or High Performance File System, is definitely the recommendation here. Admittedly, it means that we can't simply transfer files back and forth between this computer and my regular workstation by simply putting the compact flash card in a USB drive, but it does give us some disk performance benefits for OS 2. In fact, if we were going to do any OS 2 development on this computer, we'd have to use HPFS anyway, since a number of the development tools won't install unless the drive is partitioned as HPFS. The same is true of Netscape Navigator, which came with OS 2 Warp 4. HPFS is what gives OS 2 long file name support, rather than being limited to the traditional 8.3 file names, and both Netscape Navigator and some of the IBM developer tools require that, but we'll get to all of those in a future video. We talked earlier about the disk numbering for floppy disk-based installations of OS2. In all, there are 22 floppy disks for OS2 2.11, and the way the CD-based installations work is that each floppy disk is stored as a floppy disk image on the CD. So by the time we get to the grey screen stating that the hard disk preparation is complete, we've installed all the way up to disk 5. At this point, we actually have to drop ourselves to an OS2 command prompt so that we can recopy the IDE CD-ROM drivers across to the partially installed OS2 on our hard drive. Otherwise, the installation process fails later on. In OS2 Warp 3 and above, you get an option to press F3 to drop to a command prompt midway through the installation process, but you don't get that in 2.11. So instead, we reboot using our installation diskette, then diskette 1, and finally drop to a command prompt when we get to the partitioning screen again. Okay, so here we are at the OS2 command prompt. We're going to CD to disk 2, then create a tools folder on drive C, and then copy the unpack command to our tools folder. Next we CD to disk 8 and copy the packed attrib file to our tools folder. Then we change to the hard drive, we go into our tools folder and we run unpack attrib. This will automatically extract attrib.exe to COS2. We don't have to specify the destination folder. Next we CD into our OS2 folder and we remove the read-only attribute from IBM OS 506.add, essentially the IDE controller driver. Then we copy 3 updated files from our modified diskette 1 so that OS2 uses these when it boots. That's it. Then we type exit, remove our modified diskette 1, and it's time for another reboot. The reason we have to do this is that the installation program copied old versions of these 3 key files because those are what exist on the CD-ROM. Those old versions don't understand IDE CD-ROM drives, so we have to replace them with versions that do understand IDE CD-ROM drives so the installation process completes successfully later on. We're now into the graphical portion of OS2 setup. We're going to install all features, but you could otherwise select to install only specific components if you wanted to do so. We'll see this screen again later on. On the system configuration screen, we disabled serial device support, we select to change our country and keyboard layout, and we don't want to install a printer. We leave CD-ROM as none here, it won't work otherwise. I'm in the UK, so you saw that's what I selected. The installation program will now continue copying files from the CD. The reason we disable serial support is because it can cause troubles later on. Some OS2 drivers appear to conflict with the regular OS2 serial port drivers, so since I don't have any devices connected by serial, it's best to disable it. We don't have a device support diskette, so we leave that unticked. But we do want to migrate applications and we do want to configure the WinOS2 desktop, so we leave those ticked. We want the installation program to set up a standard WinOS2 desktop for us, so we leave that selected and we click on OK. If we were installing this on a computer which already had Windows installed, then we'd choose to copy that Windows installation and use it as the base for WinOS2. Or in certain circumstances, if we were doing an OS2 upgrade, we could preserve an existing WinOS2 desktop. We tell OS2 not to bother searching our CD-ROM drive and just have it find programs on the local disk. As you can see, it's found all of the out-of-the-box Windows 3.1 programs, so we go ahead and migrate those. WinOS2 is how OS2 runs Windows programs. It's not emulation or virtualization, it's real Windows. IBM and Microsoft together modified some of the Windows DLLs and core libraries to do this. By this time in OS2's lifecycle, Microsoft and IBM had parted ways, so a lot of these modifications were done by IBM because they retained access to the Windows 3 source code under the joint licensing agreement with Microsoft. It's important to note that OS2 2.1 supports up to Windows 3.1 only. It doesn't support Windows 3.11 or Windows for Workgroups. That didn't come until OS2 Warp or OS2 version 3. And even then, it couldn't support applications or devices which required VXDs or virtual device drivers. And that's it, the installation is complete. So with that, we reboot again, and we should get an OS2 desktop. And here it is, our OS2 2.11 desktop. We're not going to take the tour today, but we do have one more step in order to get our CD-ROM support back. We have to run selective install. Then we're going to tick the box for CD-ROM device support, and then we click on OK. Then we scroll all the way down and click on Other, and then OK. Now it asks if we want to install any other OS2 features, but we already have those, so we just click Install. We then change to pointed at our floppy drive, where we've once again inserted our modified diskette 1. Very quickly, it asks us for floppy disk 8, so we pop that in and it recopies the CD-ROM support files. Again, these are the old versions that don't support IDE CD-ROM drives, so we're not quite done. Before rebooting, we're going to drop to an OS2 command prompt again. We're going to reinsert our modified disk 1, and we're going to copy a specific file into C OS2. And that's it, and then we reboot again. If we go to OS2 System and then Drives, we'll see our CD-ROM drive, and we can double click on it to see the contents. Our last step before installing graphics card drivers is to install MMPM or Multimedia Presentation Manager. That's on our CD as well. So we drop to a command prompt, we CD into MMPM and run minstall. We want software motion video. I have a Sound Blaster 16 in this computer, and we want CD audio. We'll let MMPM modify our config.sys and go ahead with the installation. I'm going to select Sound Blaster Pro 16, which is a close enough match for the Sound Blaster 16 I have installed. I've only got one of them, and those are the right DMA and IRQ settings. MMPM wants me to make sure my CD-ROM drive is powered on, presumably that's for external drives, and then it copies some more files. One more reboot, and then we'll have full audio support in OS2. The last thing we're going to do today is install drivers for the Matrox Millennium graphics card I installed in this computer. In fact, that's why we're installing OS2 2.11 instead of just 2.1. And it's also why I have a Matrox Millennium in the first place, rather than using the onboard S3 graphics of this IBM computer. We've dropped to a command prompt, and if we take a look at drive D, we can see a Rix Labs folder, which I know contains the Matrox driver and a few other items. We're going to use Windows File Manager to copy that folder across to the hard drive. So we go to WinOS2 Groups, WinOS2 Main, and Launch File Manager. You'll notice that it's launched full screen, and that's because we don't have a graphics driver installed that can support running Windows apps as a windowed session in OS2. That's another reason for wanting to install the proper Matrox driver. There's the Tools folder we created, but I'm going to copy the entire Rix Labs folder from the CD to the hard drive, my compact flash drive, because it contains other utilities that we'll need later as well. As you can see, it's identical to how you'd do it in regular Windows 3.1 because it really is Windows 3.1. Matrox were the only manufacturer I could find that developed high color and true color drivers for OS2 2.anything, and they require 2.11. Many other graphics card manufacturers provided high resolution drivers, 1024 by 768, 1280 by 1024, etc., but they didn't support high color, so all you got was a maximum of 256 colors. Alright, we close File Manager, we drop to an OS2 command prompt again, CD into the Rix Labs folder, CD again into the Matrox folder, and type install. It's our primary display, of course, and if we scroll up, we should now see the Matrox driver listed. We change to the folder containing our Matrox driver. Click Set, then Install, and that's it. That'll copy a few files, and then we'll reboot, and we should have a new MGA settings icon on the desktop. It's our MGA settings icon, so we double click it, set the resolution that we want, close the program, and reboot. You'll notice there was no save button. That's typical of OS2. Changes are saved immediately, even if they're not applied immediately. And there we have it. OS2 2.11 at 1280 by 1080 in high color. And if we open File Manager again, you'll see that it's now in its own window, which we can resize and move around if we wish. Well, that's it for this video. In future videos, we're going to look at TCP/IP networking, some native OS2 applications, some Windows 3.1 applications, and we'll even have a look at how we can make OS2 2.1 look like either OS2 1.3 or even Windows 3.1. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to be notified of new content. See you next time.